That night after dinner and movie night with his family, it was time for Bryan to get ready for bed. This made him nervous and somewhat scared of what the night would bring. He tried his best to avoid going to his room. When his mom caught on to this, she forced him to go upstairs and get ready for bed and not argue because that wasn't the type of kid he was. Bryan went on to do his nightly routine, then went to his room. He stared at his bed for a few minutes, waiting for it to move. Nothing happened. No movement, no voices, nothing. Maybe his dad was right. Last night could have just been first-night jitters. He flipped the switch and the light went off. Bryan jumped into bed, pulled the covers over his head, and closed his eyes. When the clock struck midnight, the voices came back. Very quietly at first, then louder, loud enough to wake Bryan up. He sat up and looked around the room. Again, it started at the same time it had the night before. Again, the bed started to move ever so slightly. And like the story he'd heard, his bed slid across the room with him in it. He leapt out of bed, dropping his late-night snack on the floor. Bryan ran over and flipped the light back on. He was scared now more than ever before. To have his bed move that far across the room on its own had never happened to him before. Bryan took a deep breath and nervously approached the bed. What caught the young man by surprise was when a hand reached out from under the bed and grabbed his candy bar. Bryan went running out of his room, shouting at the top of his lungs and waking everyone in the house up. And that didn't sit well with his parents. Bryan tried to explain the situation to his parents. He even begged them to take a look in his room at his bed. He swore up and down that something was under his bed and had moved it across the room. He opened his door and pleaded that his parents walk inside. When they did, his parents were even more upset. Nothing had been moved, not a thing. The bed was in the same spot it had always been. Nothing in his room had changed at all. When they insisted it was just a nightmare, Bryan threw a fit. He was upset when they refused to listen to him. It was like when they had first told him they were moving. He didn't want to move and leave his friends behind, but did they listen? No. Just like now. Were they listening? No. The young man stomped back inside his room and slammed the door behind him. He could hear his parents voicing their displeasure with him as they made their way back to their own room. Bryan walked over to the bed and grabbed the covers. He curled up in a corner, covering himself up. For the first time, he felt alone, with parents that refused to listen to him and no friends to talk with. He was going to have to handle this one on his own, but not alone.